It was noon when I awoke again. After many days of sailing, we had reached the legendary lost place of Atlantis. The waters here were extraordinarily quiet, with no clouds in the air, and even the seagulls chasing after the ship were lost. I asked my henchman to invite the mermaid out. Since that dream became more and more complete and clear, my feelings towards him became more and more complicated. He was fine, going about his daily life in a pleasant manner, lazily watching my ego's tangles and inner digestion. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got, so I had him put back into the sea. He went into the sea and disappeared in a flash. I waited on the fence for half a day, until my heart was inexplicably anxious, but he never appeared. So I couldn't help but call out to him, "Linyu? You're not really leaving, are you?" There was a disappointment in my voice that I hadn't even realized yet. Just as I was about to turn around with a sense of loss, there was a crash, and Linyu came riding on the waves like a mythological god of the sea. I immediately turned around and flirted with him. "Why haven't you left? Are you reluctant to let me go, bro?" In the face of my shameless inquiry, he gave me a sidelong glance and didn't answer. Then, without me noticing any movement on his part, I was dragged by an invisible force and instantly lost my balance and fell into the sea. In the blink of an eye, I can't help but sigh, without the thing that locks his ability, even if the general of affairs to the water is not Linyu's opponent. I surfaced and almost coughed through my throat before I coughed out the water I was choking on. I was just about to breathe a sigh of relief when I realized that I had that silver-white fishtail wrapped around my waist. "Hey, what are you tying me up for? Answer me." "Ah. You slow down, I'm afraid of water." Linyu granted me the ability to breathe underwater, taking me all the way through the water. But for someone who had a phobia of the deep sea in his previous life, it was really unpleasant. The underwater of deep water is dark and silent, which can cause inexplicable panic in one's heart. And Linyu, this mermaid with a grudge, the more he saw me panic in my heart, the more he seemed to have found pleasure, taking me deeper and deeper. We swam for a long time before I saw a sight that shocked me greatly. Before my eyes stood the ruins of a massive building. It was a shocking glance that made me forget to breathe. Before my eyes stood the ruins of a massive building. The entire ruins were in the ancient Greek and Roman style. Not only were there palaces and colosseums, but there was even a temple in the middle. The entrance of the ruins guarded two 5-meter-high mermaid statues, surrounded by neatly cut stone walls. Those stones in the dim seabed actually flashed silver light. Inside, all the palaces are surrounded by gold walls and silver walls, and the walls inside the palace are encrusted with gold, brilliant. I stared at the scene in front of me with wide eyes, and unbelievably turned my head sideways to Linyu at my side and asked, "Is this the legendary Lost Atlantis?" He looked as if he was in a good mood, and actually nodded his head as an answer to my retarded question. Then he led me to swim towards the temple in the center. Touching the edge of the temple, the seawater I touched immediately and automatically dispersed, revealing a walkable passageway. I stepped my feet on the stone tiles, marveling at the magical touch, and suddenly felt that something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what it was for a moment. It was only when my eyes looked aside to Linyu that I realized the origin of this wrongness. Because he was walking on my side. That's right, walking. His fish tail had transformed into 2 human legs, and he was walking on the same gold and silver stone brick floor as me. It seemed that he was not used to walking on his legs, and he walked in a very stiff manner. Seeing this scene, I sighed, "Ah, your legs are really long." Before I finished, he impatiently dragged me into the temple. Entering the main hall, I saw a semi-transparent box placed in the center. I opened it under his gesturing gaze in confusion. I thought it would be some kind of treasure, but I didn't expect to see a female skeleton when I opened it. I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer and just looked at me sadly. I was puzzled and stared at it for a long time, and suddenly realized that the skeleton contained in this seemed to be my own. Because next to that skeleton I saw a piece of broken armor. And the style of this armor, which I had seen in my dreams, was the one I always wore on my body. To be honest, I didn't know how to express the feeling of seeing my own skeleton. I could only take a closer look at my skeleton, and through the bones I realized that I had actually had my flesh and blood picked out, leaving only the skeleton. I was instantly displeased and questioned Linyu, "Why did you remove the flesh from my body? Even though I used to force you to do things you didn't want to do, you can't hurt me like this." Linyu glanced at me without answering. I was just about to continue arguing with him when a loud cracking sound came from not far away. Linyu and I glanced at each other, knowing that something bad had happened, and immediately tensed up and walked back. As soon as we went out, we saw an unexpected person. The gene fusion scientist I had invited. He was diving in full armor, with a crowd of people similarly armed in place behind him. "Yo, Professor Wang, you're here on an expedition as well?" I greeted the old man. Wang Hai was quite advanced and had brought underwater sound transmission equipment with him. He said to me smilingly, "Yes, thanks to Ms. Lin, make the mermaid to bring us here, otherwise I'm afraid that I won't be able to find this underwater kingdom in my lifetime." "Oh? Is that so?" Looking at the crowd behind him, I pulled out the gun and smiled at him. "You're welcome." Wang Hai didn't change his expression when he faced the gun I was holding up and Linyu, who had reappeared as a fishtail behind me. He looked at me appreciatively. "Lin Wanyi, you are worthy of being my most satisfying work. However, you don't think that a gene fusion product can defeat the father who created it, do you?" I was so confused that I asked, "What do you mean?" Wang Hai smiled amiably, but this smile struck me as familiar. He said to me, "You're able to sit at the highest position in California because of the ability I gave you. If it wasn't for the rapid wound healing and regeneration ability I gave you, as well as the brain that is genetically fused with dolphins, you were afraid that you would have died in that melee of California. What a pity, I thought you were my most perfect creation, but I didn't realize that it still wasn't perfect enough. After 1,000 years, you still fall in love with this mermaid." He spoke in a smug tone and pulled out a device from his body. I only saw Wang Hai press the object, and an extraordinarily familiar sharp pain instantly came from my chest. The sharp pain made my knees weaken, and the gun fell from my hands, collapsing into the arms of the mermaid behind me. Linyu, who caught me, suddenly exploded with scales all over his body, his gaze chilling, and the water pressure around him increased steeply. Under the increasing water pressure in a short period of time, the people brought by Wang Hai began to wail in pain, and even after a few seconds began to collectively bleed from their eyes and ears, and the bloody aura of dozens of people suddenly filled the sea. Seeing this, Wang Hai immediately gripped the thing controlling me in his hand, covering his own head in severe pain and threatening Linyu, "If you want to kill me with your voice, then she'll die now." Linyu stared at him with a deadly stare. Wang Hai gulped nervously. Both sides were silent for a long time, and I was so tortured by the dull pain in my chest that I was so unconscious that I didn't notice what was happening, and when I looked up again, I only saw that the group's symptoms of pain seemed to have lessened a lot. Linyu held me tightly in his arms and watched me pass out from the pain. After a long time, he opened his mouth to Wang Hai. Wang Hai seemed to have understood, so he took a breath and said to him, "I won't take her life as long as you give me the holy relic that Atlantis left behind." Linyu frowned and thought for a moment, and seemed to compromise, nodding at Wang Hai to show that he agreed to the deal with him. Immediately, Wang Hai smiled kindly again, and after telling him that he would keep me safe, he led the way and landed on the stone steps of the temple, following Linyu as he tried to go to the temple to obtain the holy relic. I was held in Linyu's arms. Although I was in a lot of pain, I still provocatively asked Wang Hai, "Professor Wang, what do you want to do with all the effort you spent to get this thing?" He seemed to be in a good mood as he was about to get what he wanted, and answered me like a professor answering a student's question, "All people want to live forever, and I am no exception." I let out a sigh of understanding and said, "So you haven't lived long enough, Professor." Wang Hai glanced at me, not disliking my rudeness, and continued, "You're still young, so you don't understand. When you're old like me, you'll want to live forever too." I continued to tease him, "Look at you, Professor, you're talking like you've been alive for a long time." This time Wang Hai didn't answer me again. Because the journey was too long, I started to ask again, "Professor Wang, I can understand your desire to live forever, but there is one thing that is quite unfortunate." He was piqued by my words and took my words and asked me, "Unfortunate what?" I said to him word by word, "It's just a pity that you are too conceited." Before I finished my words, I disappeared into Lin Yu's arms in front of Wang Hai's incredulous eyes. In the next second, the gun was aimed at his head from behind. I said to him, "Emperor, after so many years, you still can't change the conceit. You don't really think that this is all you can do with the most satisfying work you've ever created, do you?" My relaxed tone made the cozy look on Wang Hai's face disappear. He asked me coldly, "When did you know? Then why did you bring me here?" I ran my hand over Wang Hai's jaw until I reached a slightly uneven spot, lifted his human skin mask, and faced that 1,000-year-old face, explaining, "How could I fool you if I didn't appear to be a bit stupid? But Emperor, this long-lost human skin mask of yours is really well made. You didn't peel it off from the real Professor Wang's face, did you?" He didn't say anything, but just pointed at the bodyguards who had pulled out their guns and surrounded us in a circle from the time of the action just now, so that I could see the reality. He threatened me once again, "Lin Wani, think carefully, I can control you, you can't kill me. Do you want everyone to die here?" I smiled at Lin Yu on the opposite side and said, "I didn't say I wanted to kill you either." Wang Hai didn't understand my words very well, but driven by the desire to survive, he opened his mouth to make a deal with me. "Then what do you want to do? Do you want money, or fame and fortune? I can also share the secret of eternal life with you." "Emperor, why are you still acting like an old codger?" I pressed the gun in my hand harder against his head, making the people around us who were pointing guns at us even more nervous. I was amused by their behavior and said after taking a breather, "All these are not what I want. Back then, you raised me. I helped you fight to recover the border. The favor of your upbringing has long been repaid. I only have one idea now. That is," before I finished speaking, I took advantage of the moment when Wang Hai's attention was attracted by my words to seize the instrument in his hand that was controlling me, and then instantly flashed back to Lin Yu's side, and then flashed out of the divine hall together with him when everyone didn't react. The moment they left the temple's range, the temple also instantly lost Lin Yu's protection. The Atlantis kingdom without the protection of the sea god's ability was like a common ruin in the sea. The blood shed by those people just now had long since attracted swarms of sharks. Without protection, these sharks instantly rushed into the temple, and the deep Black Sea surface was dyed red with blood. After returning from Europe, Lin Yu and I went back to California. In order for Lin Yu to be able to both live with me and go back to the sea at any time, I bought a large villa by the sea and built a tunnel underneath the villa that goes straight to the bottom of the sea. I think I've been very accommodating to him, but he really holds a grudge. I didn't just ask him if the only way to turn out human legs was in the temple, and he pulled me into the sea. My name is Lin Wani, and I woke up lying in a laboratory filled with various instruments. My hearing and perception became extraordinarily sensitive. So I heard their conversations. They fused my genes with dolphins and cheetahs, giving me an extremely high intelligence and excellent healing ability. I was able to learn in a short period of time something I had never touched before. In the 3rd year after I woke up, a voice suddenly appeared in my mind, a voice that was low and ethereal, speaking a language I couldn't understand. But I knew he was calling my name. Then I began to have a dream about a mermaid and a female admiral. I remembered everything and learned that the mermaid I had once captured was injured because he was fighting with other male mermaids for sovereignty of my ship. In other words, he, a mermaid, had gained sovereignty over me after defeating all the mermaids and becoming king of Atlantis. And I thought at first that I had captured a rare mermaid. And thanks to dolphin genes, I understood everything after my death. I will also eventually seek revenge on the emperor who dreamed of immortality but left me to die. In this life, the first time I saw Lin Yu was that auction. It was funny to say that a real-life fish was treated as a gene fusion species and locked up in the vessels. Instead, I, a gene fusion species, sat outside and watched the people below cause a commotion to get him. However, I saw him in the vessels and greeted him in my mind. Lin Yu, it's been a long time. After 1,000 years, you are mine again.